Okay, very good evening to everyone. I'm going to make a start. Thank you for coming. So this is the T1 for capital markets, and we are now getting towards the end of term. So just a number of housekeeping things to let you know. First of all, I've kind of tidied up. I've tidied up my slides. I think that the tutorial file of last week had too much material and I was not able to cover all of it. So I have actually sliced it. So the tutorial file for last week basically had all the things we talked about last week, which is the background of ISDA and then the overview. So those slides should now correspond to all the things that we discussed. And then for today, what I would like to do is to pick up. So I'm going to do a little bit of a recap because it was 2 weeks ago that we last met, wasn't it? In fact, it was last year when we met, technically. So I'm going to do a little bit of a recap and I'm going to pick up from where we left off on ISDA, and I also want to talk a little bit about mark-to-market, which is a topic that's always fascinated me, and I want to bring out some issues that maybe you haven't thought about. Maybe you haven't thought about these things. And I want to compare some interesting cases. And want to just let you know what is the game plan for this week and next week. Now, we only have a couple more weeks to go today, and we are going to meet for tutorials one more time. So we are here. So next week, so like I said, I have to give away that 5%. And we're going to have a little quiz. Might ask you questions on IRS, and I'll ask you questions on ISDA, and possibly on mark-to-market. Now, I ask you, don't worry about these things. If you have paid attention during class and you listen to what I've been saying and you understand, then you won't have any problems. Okay? So the idea is not to give you a hard time. So IRS, you should be quite comfortable doing those spread calculations. You remember? So you turn a fixed rate loan into a floating rate, or a fixed rate bond into a floating rate, or a floating rate loan into a fixed rate liability, and so on. So those are interesting and I think necessary calculations for any kind of banker or fund manager. So we already talked about that last time I gave you the overall framework. I'm going to pick up today from where we left off. Mark-to-market is a topic that is more interesting than you think. And I'm going to try and bring out the interesting aspects by going through with you a couple of examples. One of them you are certainly aware of, Country Garden. The other one some of you may be aware of, and that's the case of Xiaomi. Okay, so that's the plan for this week. So next week, please do come, because there will be a chance for you to pick up another 5% during the tutorial. Okay, all the questions will be different between these, but in any case, please don't tell your friends. Okay, I know you won't do that. Just do the quiz and then that's it. Okay. So Chris Lee, yes, and then next week, after we do the quiz, if we have some time left, what I would like to do is possibly to discuss some of these cases that you have gone through in the last 4 weeks, but more on a generic basis, conceptual basis, and I can share with you my thoughts and feelings on some of these and the things that and how it actually made me think about some of the really important issues in finance. Okay, so that'll be this week and next week. A couple more things to highlight now. So by now, I hope that you are familiar with Chris Lee's style and what's so funny? I don't get the joke. But what I was going to say, and you should know this already. But what I was going to say was that if when you make a comment in class, either when you are opening a case or you ask a question or you respond to someone's comment, we give you points. And it is particularly easy for me to do so, even from the back. And the reason is very simple. I have your seating plan, right? So don't sit on someone else's seat. Otherwise, you're going to give them points, okay? But my message to you is do try and speak up and speak out. We strongly encourage you to do so. And so far, for practically everyone, every comment of every lecture, it's in my database, okay? And some of you have done quite well. So there are 2 more sessions. Including even on Thursday when we had the guest speaker, for example. Okay. So everything we know, all right? So that's on participation. And just to let you know now, all the cases are in this drive, all 8 of them. So if you want to refer to the electronic version, you can do that, but they cannot be downloaded. It's read only. Okay. So I think you know the drill. So this is the schedule. So next week, we will be looking at Morgan Stanley and General Motors, which are very interesting. And then the week after that on Mogen and Alibaba. Okay? Is everyone okay with that? Yeah? That's all I want to say, I think, by way of housekeeping stuff. Now, let me just pick up from where we left off, okay? Because it was, it's been a couple of weeks, so I'll just refresh your memory with just an overview of ISTA and what it's really for. Now, you actually can turn around and just ask yourself a question. You know, bankers are, in the end, I think, very simple people. They worry about losing money. That's it. And in the exciting and wonderful world of derivatives, if you are a bank and you are facing a client, okay, now I'm recapping just what we did last time. Okay, if you are a bank and you are facing a client with some kind of derivative transaction, oops, are you guys okay? So let's say the client wants to buy oil at $100 a barrel, and they want to buy a million barrel of oil. So that is $100 million transaction. 100 million barrels, and let's say they want to do that in 2 years' time. Now, this sort of transaction happens all the time. So the first thing that bankers worry about, just what sequence shall I tell you it? So net them off. Yeah. So you can have lots and lots of this type of transactions. So let's say, China Eastern Airlines, EASTERN, China Eastern Airlines is hedging with BNP, just hypothetically. So they want to buy oil at this price. Now, China Eastern Airlines is such a big company, so they can have lots and lots of transactions, and I've just listed one of them, okay? So lots and lots of transactions, and each of them will have an individual mark-to-market. So sometimes they might be winning. So in one case, they're winning 2 million. Maybe in another one, they're losing 1. They're losing 1 million here, losing 1 million there. And then in another one, they're making 3 million. And then in another one, they are losing 2. And then in another one, they are losing another 2.5. Now, I already said to you last time that if you were to add them up, if you add them up, okay, then what is this? So plus 2, 0, plus 3, minus 1.5. Minus 1.5. Now, so we discussed this last time, and I gave you the example. I said, do you think that if one of these other parties ever became bankrupt, what should happen? And you guys were thinking that this is the negative mark-to-market for the client, China Eastern Airlines. So they should just pay this amount to BNP. Remember we had this discussion? Yeah? Last time. Everyone is okay with that? Now, you guys are all very sensible, potential professionals. That is what should happen. That is not what in fact will happen in contract law unless you put in this term called netting, unless you say netting applicable. That's all you need to do. That's all you need to say, netting applicable. That solves a lot of problems. That solves $1 million problem. If you say netting not applicable, you're really looking for trouble. You're asking for trouble. Because if it was not applicable, then in case China Eastern Airlines goes bankrupt, then they can claim on BNP on this and on this. So BNP needs to pay 5 million, and for the negative one, so -1, -2, -4, -6.5, BNP will need to file a claim if netting was not applicable. You guys are okay with that? Yeah? Yes. Sorry? MTM, mark-to-market. Netting, oh, I'm sorry, netting. Netting, N-E-T-T-I-N-G, netting. Oh, negative. Yeah, I-B-E, negative. Sorry, you haven't seen that before. Okay, what do you think this is? Yeah, positive, okay. I'm sorry, thank you for asking. Some people do that, okay. Now, that is the first thing that makes bankers nervous, is that without netting, potentially you are in with a big nightmare if you have such a dispersed list of transactions with a lot of very, very positive mark to market and a lot of very, very negative mark to market. If you don't have netting, you really can't sleep well at night. Is that okay with everyone? Now that's the first thing. That's the first thing. The second thing is, even if you have netting, even if you do, so you have all these transactions and you add them all up, and if they're all going the same way, so this one is losing 2, this one is losing another 1, losing another 3.5, losing another 2, and losing another 3, and so on. Maybe there's one that is not losing for now, okay? So what is the total now? So it's 2 minus 3 minus 6.5 minus 8.5 minus 11.5 minus 11.5 million negative mark to market. I think it's 11.5. 2, 3, 6.5, 8.5. Yeah. And so netting is not really going to help you here, because with all the transactions, the client is losing. It's all going one way. So this is the second thing that can make bankers really nervous. So they're thinking, all right, well, what are we going to do? So why don't we set up something quite similar to margin trading? And in fact, you know, it is simpler than margin trading when you think about it. And they call that the credit support annex. And this one has 2 parameters. There is a number called the threshold. And let's just say I set the threshold at 10 million. Let's just say 10. These numbers are highly negotiable, so they can be any number you want. And then there is another thing called the minimum transfer amount. And I'm going to set that at, let's just say 1 million. Okay. And so here is the situation you have now. As of this moment, there is an $11.5 million negative mark to market. And the other day in the last tutorial, I actually drew a graph, which I think makes it a lot easier to understand. So this is time. This is your mark to market. So obviously you are negative. And let's say this is the minus $10 mark, the minus $10 million mark. So as long as you are above, people are going to leave you alone. But the moment you trade through the threshold, this is the threshold. So the threshold. So now, right now, at this point, your mark to market is minus 11.5 as of this moment. So they will simply ask you to pay this gap here. What is the gap? 1.5 million. Thank you. So they will ask you, but they will ask another question. Okay, we want you to pay this, but is this actually bigger than the minimum, what it is? So they will ask you to pay 1.5 million. Okay, now just suppose tomorrow things got even worse, and so let's say it was a vertical fall, so it just went from 10 or slightly above 10, and it dropped to 11.5. So immediately the derivative sales guy or the relationship manager will pick up the phone and call the client and say, can you please pay us $1.5 million? Now, I ask you, let's say the day after, it actually got a little bit worse, but now the mark to market is minus, let's say 11.75, 11 3/4. So the mark to market deteriorated another $250,000 from 11.5 to 11 3/4. I'll use decimals. Oh, sorry. Okay. So 11.5 minus 11.75. Now, if I were to ask you, what do you think BNP will want the client to do? They should pay the gap between the threshold and this one, right? Which is 1.75. And because they already paid 1.5 the day before, they need to pay another 0.25. And BNP will not bother because this little additional amount is less than the minimum. So it is, if you were to set up a spreadsheet to calculate this, it'll probably take you 5 minutes. It is that simple. Okay. So every day you look at the mark to market and you just determine how big this gap is, which will tell you how much they need to, how much margin, if you want to call it that way, how much margin top up they need to do, or how much additional margin top up they need to do. Additional is the key word. How much additional top up, and is that additional amount even worth bothering? It is not if it is less than the minimum transfer. That's why it's called a minimum transfer amount. Is everyone okay with that? Because I think last time we were in a hurry, we were near the end, and I didn't explain this very clearly. Is everyone okay now? Yeah, it is really quite simple. Okay? I might ask you about that in the quiz. Okay. So that's the second thing that people worry about in the banking. The bankers, when they are facing clients with big derivative exposures. Why do I call it top up? No reason. It's just, well, it's because they already pay 1.5. Top up in the sense of margining. Top up your margin account. Although I shouldn't really talk in this kind of language because that is what you do with top up with margin trading. But don't take that word too seriously. Okay. You need to pay up more by way of collateral. Okay. Yeah. The frequency of potentially daily. It can be daily. Yeah. Potentially it can be every day. So when markets are very, very volatile, you could be getting a phone call from your banker every day. And typically when they ask you to pay, the dollars. When they are asking you to post collateral, typically it is either in cash or government bonds. Is everyone okay? Somebody else ask a question. Thank you. Make sure you understand this because I'm busy with 10 minutes. Wow. you won't bother because, okay, let me go through this again. Now, you already, because the day before, when there was a valuation gap, and your mark to market the day before was minus 11.5. So therefore, you already paid 11, and you already paid 1.5. So today it got a little bit worse. Today your mark to market was minus 11.75. So if you were to pay this gap, you should actually give them enough money, which will be 1.75. Because you already gave them 1.5 million, so what they would ask for is an additional 0.25. They won't bother because this amount of money, for you to pay them this amount of money is less than the minimum transfer amount. So the minimum transfer is the minimum amount of payment they will ask from you at any moment in time. You don't need to pay. Yeah. Now it will be different. Let me ask you this. So let's say the day after, things got a little bit worse. So now your mark to market at this point is now minus 12 million. Are they going to ask you to pay them anything? Why not? Okay, you are getting it now. You are completely getting it. Okay. I want to say two more things about CSA, which are very interesting. Okay. The first thing is, so if you want to have a CSA with maximum, I don't know how to say this, but maximum security or maximum conservative, how would you structure a CSA which has the maximum conservative protection? Maybe I have not asked the question in a very good way, but when I tell you the answer, you will understand exactly what I'm asking. Now, when you are negotiating a CSA, there are only two things to negotiate: the threshold and the minimum transfer. There are only two numbers to negotiate. If you are negotiating on behalf of your bank, so you of course then you're trying to protect your bank, and you want to be extremely conservative, and you want your bank to get the best protection from this CSA. What numbers are you going to put in here? What is the number you would put for threshold? 0. What do you put for minimum transfer? Well, put 1, okay? Just give him a bit of room, okay? But you know what I'm saying? And some people do that. They do that, okay? Especially with small clients, they would do that. If you are JP Morgan dealing with PetroChina, for example, so it depends who you're dancing with. If it's a big guy dancing with a little boy, yeah, they're gonna get pushed around, okay? Like this. So it's basically open for negotiation, okay? Now the other thing which is interesting is there is this thing called one-way CSA. Again, this happens when the bargaining power between two parties are not equal. You can probably guess what a one-way CSA is. First of all, so far, all the things we've talked about, they are two-way. So
if China Eastern is losing, they pay to BNP. But if BNP is losing, they should pay to the customer as well. It's two ways. So you can probably guess what a one-way CSA is. So I am JP Morgan, and you are Johnny's Pizza down the road. You want to play with me? Okay, no problem. We sign a CSA. That's not a problem. We sign a one-way CSA. Okay. So you ask me, what is that? Okay, when you're losing, you pay me. When I'm losing, I don't pay you. It sounds, a little bit harsh. These things happen, and I tell you what, these things happen when big banks are dealing with smaller clients, and the smaller clients don't really have a lot of choice. They only have a few bankers. But when big banks, even really big banks that are international, when they turn around and they deal with central banks, like SAFE or EBOC, Bank of Korea, Bank of Japan, Bank of England. When big banks are dealing with central banks, they get a taste of that treatment. But it's the other way around. You know what I'm saying? Yes. You are JP Morgan, you go to see SAFE, and they'll say, okay, let's sign one with CSA. JP Morgan, yeah, no problem. No, it's one way against you, not me. Okay.
That's a one-way CSA. So that is so I told you the couple of things that make bankers nervous, and this is still just a recap from last time. Okay, so the netting solves quite a lot of problems, and if that doesn't work, the CSA will come to the rescue. Now there is a third dimension. I should say A and B here, so you don't get confused. These are just a couple of interesting features on CSA. So there is a third dimension, and this one is really not hard to understand, and it is related to what I was saying to you earlier last time, that you can have a big organization. Think of GE. So you have oil and gas and aviation and energy and water and power. And then down here you have GE Capital. GE Capital, you remember that chart? Yeah? Now, typically, in a big company, so when they are dealing derivatives, all of them are consolidated with one entity. So let's say JP Morgan will be dealing derivatives with GE Capital. So that means all the contracts are written between GE Capital and JP Morgan, although some of the transactions are related to aviation or oil and gas and this and that. So oil and gas, aviation, I've forgotten what the first one was, global growth or something. Now, the third thing that makes bankers nervous is if you are dealing with this company and they are behaving well,
and they are making all their payments on time, you're doing swaps, they're honoring all their derivative obligations, but
there is a fire somewhere else within the company. When I say fire, I mean there's something bad happening to other parts of the company. Maybe aviation is under financial distress. Oil and gas has a huge
blow up or terrorist attack or huge loss somewhere. So you are JP Morgan
looking at GE Capital,
and you are thinking, this unit here is going to bring the whole company down. It has happened before. You don't have to look far. Look at AIG. Look what happened then. Okay? So 10 years ago, AIG or the AIA group was on the brink of collapse because of AIG.
in fact, it was AIG Financial Products. So one unit potentially can bring down the whole company.
So you are JP Morgan and you are dealing with GE Capital. And this is, I guess, this is what contract law is all about. You are facing GE Capital. Whatever is happening elsewhere is none of your business. So as a banker, you worry about that. Now,
and like, again, think of it like this. This is something that is practically unique to the banking world. And it only happens in finance
because of the way companies are structured and the way transactions are done. So it wouldn't happen it wouldn't happen if you were selling an aircraft to someone. You just buy your aircraft, I pay you money. That's it. So in that, although that comes with different set of problems. But when you are dealing derivatives
within a corporate framework, frequently you are dealing with a single entity, but there are 1,000 things happening elsewhere in other parts of the company. And sometimes these things can be quite disturbing. And AIG was one of the best examples I can think of. Does everyone understand what I'm saying? Even if you don't understand how to deal with it, you understand the problem, right? Okay? Now, let me then show you how ISTA actually helps people deal with that. Now, when you look at an ISTA contract, first of all, let me show you something else. Okay, something that I think many of you have seen before, which is a rental contract. It's called a tenancy agreement, but this is a very standard rental. You guys are
renting, or you have your own apartment? Or are you renting to somebody? Now, you're renting, I think you have seen one of these. These are legal documents. It means people can take this piece of paper and go to court and actually get you in trouble if you break your promises. Now, in a very standard rental contract, there is
the first part, which is just a standard template. It's very boring. And then you just sign there. And then there is another part, typically, which is called the schedule.
You can see what's going on. So schedule is you put in the address, who's the owner, the telephone number, who's the tenant, when you start, basically all the commercial parameters. You must have seen this before, right? Because you guys are living here. I thought it's good to show you this because ISTA, in the end, is a similar concept, but in a big way. Okay, and I'm going to show you what an ISDA looks like in a moment.
So this is a rental contract. So you could say that there are two parts to it. The first part, which is super boring, and all the legal stuff. How come I can't do this? Just get out and come back. So the first. Okay, I'll do this. So the first part, just all the standard terms, and you honestly don't really change any of this stuff, but you can if you want to. But you have to initially, yeah. But most people won't change because the terms are very, very generic and standardized, so you don't change it. But the schedule is where you would put in most of the relevant parameters. Okay. Now ISDA is similar. So in the ISDA documentation framework, there are 5 elements. So there is a master agreement. I will show you what that looks like in a moment. There is a schedule to the master agreement. Now the master agreement is practically totally static. Static means it doesn't change much. The schedule is also static, but you have more inputs. And then there are ISDA definitions, and you don't make any inputs at all. Then there is the deal confirmation, and then there is a CSA, which I say is optional, but nowadays is practically mandatory. I should actually switch them around. So this one, the reason is, think of it like this, okay? So today, so you are China Eastern Airlines, and you are dealing with BNP, and you want to do an interest rate swap. Let's just say you do. So your contract, your so-called derivative contract, will have a lot of parts. The entire contract will have the master agreement, there will be a schedule to the agreement, there is the definitions. Now I'll show you what these look like. Just bear with me for a moment. There is the definitions. There may well be there may well be a CSA. This is optional, but nowadays many people will do it. And then you will have the interest rate swap confirmation. Now, what is so good about this? What's so good about this is once you have negotiated this and this and this and this, you don't have to do it anymore. You just do that one time. So you negotiate your ISDA, and then next time if you do a forward, you use the same template, and then you just plug in, a forward confirmation. And then maybe after that, you do another trade, which is an FX option, for instance. And then you would issue a confirmation, and in the confirmation will refer to this bunch of documents. Sorry, what was your question? The same client. Correct. Yeah. So he asked me if it's the same client. So in the end, the agreement is a mutual agreement between two parties. You walk into a big bank like UBS or JP Morgan, very likely they would already have ISDA agreements with all the big clients. And this is an exercise you only have to do it once in your lifetime. Okay? Like getting married. Now, let me show you what a master agreement looks like. It's not the most exciting document in the world, but at least you know what it looks like. Okay, I want you to know what it looks like. And I can even put a copy in the Blackboard drive if you want to have a look at it. Okay, here's what the master agreement looks like. And this one actually was real. So it's a master agreement dated whenever
between two parties, Comerica Bank and Rackspace US Incorporated, Delaware Corporation. And there's all this stuff. Now this one, like I said, you don't really change, and it goes on forever. You can read it if you want to. Okay. Talks about withholding tax, representation. So this is pretty much like the first part of the rental agreement that I just showed you. People typically do not change anything here, and it's a template, yeah. And then termination events. I will talk about these in a moment, okay? But feel free to go home and read it. What is default? Transfer, contractual currency. You know, if you're a lawyer, you'd love this kind of stuff. Multi-branch. So what offices are covered by this agreement? So if you are BNP, it could be Paris, BNP London, BNP Hong Kong, or whatever. Okay, it could be just one office if that's what they want. There are some definitions here. They even define what a market quotation is, and so on and so forth. It just goes on, but you just go to the end and you ask the guy in charge to sign it. Okay? Normally, this is someone who is fairly senior, like the chief risk officer, or maybe the CFO or the CEO. Okay? Someone who has that authority. Now, this is a master agreement, which isn't really that exciting. I'll show you what the definitions look like. Now, the definitions are divided into different asset classes. So here are definitions for credit derivatives. So you have one for FX, you have one for interest rates, you have one for commodities. This one is for credit derivatives. Notice the date, 2003. You're thinking, wow, so old, okay? You know what? That's good. That means it's very robust. It's like red wine. And it has basically withstood the test of the challenge of time. And over time, if it was revised every year, there's some problem with it, okay? So it's good that it's a long time ago.
So they define these things: effective date, trade date, termination date, grace period, calculation agent, business days. I told you it's not exactly the most exciting thing you'll read, but if ever how many pages are there? Oh my God. Lots and lots of definitions, okay? So, because these are, and you don't change these, the lawyers and ISDA already agreed on it. So they even define what is the effective date, what is a trade date, and so on, okay? So that's the definitions. Now I told you there are 5 elements, and a credit support annex, I'll show you that now. I'll show you number 2 a little later, the schedule. So you want to know what a CSA looks like. This is a credit support annex issued by ISDA. And like I said, now this one is less complicated, but it talks about transfers. And somewhere down there, if you look carefully, dispute resolution, they will talk about the threshold and the minimum transfer amount. I mean, for most of you guys, you let the lawyers to worry about this, but you do need to know the key elements, and the 2 key elements are the threshold and the minimum transfer amount. This is the definition. Here you go. So here is when you would actually put in the threshold. Now, like I said, so thresholds, in fact, they can be different. They can be different. So if I am JP Morgan and you are Johnny's Pizza, for me, threshold 100 million. For you, 0. You can do it like that. For me, minimum transfer amount $80 million. For you, $1. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So this is the key part. Okay. That's the CSA. And what else? Deal confirmation. Well, I can show you one of these, but hold on. This is when you actually put up an initial margin. Thank you for asking. I didn't talk about that. That is before you even trade anything. Give me some money. Yeah. Margin. Yeah. Initial margin. I'm sorry I didn't mention that. It's good you picked it up. But this can be, okay, JP Morgan, 0. For you, 15 million. So things don't have to be symmetric.
Do you need to pay some money? What do you mean you need to pay some money? Because you have some the independent amount. The independent amount is the initial deposit that you put in each other's account. So if it's 0, then I don't need to pay you anything at the beginning, but you need to pay me some money before we even start. So, No, I think that's correct. I think that is that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah, you better not get them the other way around.
15 million for country means that country has to pay $15 million to IA in the.
That is my interpretation right now, yes. Anyway, don't worry about that one. But I'm so glad you asked about that. Okay?
So, I'm not giving you bullshit. These things, they really happen. Okay. I mean, people really do this kind of processing. I was about to show you a very simple. This is a typical swap confirmation. Can you read that? I know. All right. I don't know why it is. I'm sorry, the font is a bit funny. So this is a swap. Is an interest cross-currency swap between the Bank of Nova Scotia and a client called Arcos Dorados BV, and now the interesting part to read is this one. This confirmation, this thing, which is only like 7 pages, is a confirmation as referred to a supplement form file and is subject to the is the master agreement dated as of whatever. So this one cannot exist unless it is supplemented by whatever master agreement that they already agreed on. So this one is in fact very simple.
You know, by lawyer standard, it's very simple. We just got trade day, effective date, notional principal, who's party A, who's party B, who's paying fixed,
And who is paying floating? So it's floating 50 million. This is actually a cross-currency interest rate swap.
Okay. So don't worry about that. We're not pricing it today. So 50 million US, 3-month LIBOR, plus a spread of some kind, I imagine. But there's an initial LIBOR value. This will change every 3 months. So that's what a confirmation looks like.
Now, like I said, this is what I call a simple document compared to something like the master agreement. Oh, did I close that down? The master agreement, and I don't even know how many pages that one was. How many pages is it? Oh, okay, it's not too bad. 25 pages. Well, I guess the definitions is the one that really is the one that has a lot of details. Okay. Now there is one thing I have not shown you yet, which is the second one, the schedule. And the schedule is actually the most important, because in the schedule there are a lot of things that you can change, and things are heavily negotiated. And I'm going to now show you what a schedule looks like, and then I will explain the various things in a schedule. So this is what a schedule looks like. Now it is actually a pretty simple document. So this is a schedule. So you've got the two parties are still there, party A, party B. There is a thing here called specified entity. There's a thing here called specified transaction. And there's a thing here called cross default. Now, I will explain to you what these things are very shortly. And I really think these are the most important things to remember. So the first part, all right, let me take a step back. The first part of the schedule has what we call termination provisions, of which one of them is called specified entity. Now just bear with me for 5 minutes and I'll tell you what these are. And specified transaction and cross default. Now, the second part is called tax representation. This actually isn't really that important. Part 3, agreement to deliver documents. I will explain these, but the most interesting part is actually part 1. And then part 4, miscellaneous. Don't worry about that. And part 5, other things. Don't worry about that. I think netting appears in here somewhere. Netting of payments. Anyway, now let me then explain to you this this concept of the schedule. So the schedule has 5 sections, as I said. The first one is called termination events. Now, you would remember around 45 minutes ago, I was telling you that there are a number of things that bankers are very nervous about. The first one is when there are a lot of transactions, if you don't have netting, you're in big trouble if your counterparty ever defaults, number one. Number two, even if you have netting, if you add everything together and it's a whopping big amount, so you are still worried, so you can use a CSA to handle that. Number three is you are dealing with a big organization and you may be dealing with GE Capital and they're behaving well, they're making all the payments, but you know there's trouble elsewhere, which is making you very, very nervous about the entire company, including GE Capital. Now that also can make bankers very nervous. And here's how they deal with it. They deal with it by having these so-called terminating events or termination provisions. Okay. Now there are several kinds. So the first one is called specified entity. Now I'll explain to you what this means. So suppose you have and I can even use this picture here. So now JP Morgan is dealing with GE Capital in all their derivative trades. And then suddenly GE Aviation has blown up. They've gone bankrupt. JP Morgan is very worried. The whole company is coming down, okay? Normally, if there is an ISDA signed between JP Morgan and GE Capital, and you really would sign it like that. You would sign it in the master agreement. You would put, sorry, making you dizzy. Here, you would put JP Morgan, and here you would put GE Capital. Now, if you sign an ISDA like this, then if ever there is a problem elsewhere in the company, let's say GE Aviation, and JP Morgan is down here, becoming quite worried with all their transactions. So the question is there anything they can do? The answer is no, nothing. Because the contract is with GE Capital. What happens elsewhere, GE will say to JP Morgan, it's not your business. Well, you don't. That's the thing. You normally will sign it with whoever you are going to trade with. This is just a way that, corporations are set up. What they can do, and I will show you what they can do, and it's really very simple. What you can do is in your schedule, when there's an entry here called specified entity. So let's say this really is an ISDA between JP Morgan and GE Capital. You can put down here GE Aviation. This is for party A. So party A is JP Morgan. So you can put down here for party B, GE Aviation. You can put down here, or JP Morgan can ask you to put down here anything they want. You can put down here GE Oil and Gas. Now, once these things are here as specified entities, it means if one day these companies ever got in trouble, which is to say in the corporate hierarchy, if originally I was JP Morgan looking at GE Capital, if there was a fire happening somewhere else, the company can no longer say to me, this is none of your business. It is my business. And I can just terminate all my trades. I can calculate a mark to market, and then I can just end the relationship. Now you understand why I talked about the prenup. Yeah. It's yeah. That's a good question. It is not so much that now you look at this document, you think, oh, there are only 4 lines here, so maybe you can only put 4. No, you can put 4,000 if you want. So it's not so much a physical limitation. It's more like it's a negotiation. So it depends on the balance of bargaining power. But there's nothing to say, okay, you can only put 10 or 20. Okay, it's all about bargaining power. Now, if everyone is okay with that, the specified entity. Now, specified transaction is somewhat similar, but this time we are not focusing on a company. We are focusing on something that the company is doing. So maybe oil and gas has a $500 million oil forward with Deutsche Bank, for example, and you are worried that something is going to go wrong with this transaction, or it could be that aviation has a loan with BOA, a bank loan, BOA bank loan, and you are worried that there's something will happen with this loan. Not the company might be okay, but something bad is going to happen to this loan. So you want to put that transaction down in the schedule. So you really would put down here, specified transaction, any transaction that is making you nervous. You put them down there. So if something bad happens to that transaction, I'm going to pick up the phone and call you. I'm going to calculate all the mark-to-markets, and then I'm going to either I pay you or you pay me, the total mark-to-market. It's like checking out. You finish your dinner. We're checking out, okay? Or I'm sorry to use this example, but the marriage is over, so let's do a mark-to-market. So you want the apartment, okay, I keep the car, you get this, I keep that, and then we say goodbye, that kind of stuff. Is everyone okay with that? If it's specified transaction, yes, you are right. Yeah, but some transactions can last for a long time. Now, cross default is a very, very interesting one. And if you want to become a fixed income professional, you must understand, who understands what cross default is? Very good. You're right. So if this is China Eastern Airlines, so they have, oh no, we were talking about GE, aren't we? GE is trading with JP Morgan. Now, GE can have hundreds, thousands of transactions with JP Morgan, and GE can be behaving very, very well with JP Morgan, and maybe GE has never missed even one single payment. So when people are paying you, you can't really complain, but maybe GE has other counterparties, HSBC or Barclays. Cross default means, all right, so what you do is in the schedule, you would simply put cross default, colon, applicable or not applicable, as the case might be. If you say applicable, that means if ever GE defaults on HSBC, JP Morgan can say, you have defaulted on me. And GE will say, no, I haven't. And JP Morgan will say, yes, you have, because in our agreement, we say that cross default was applicable.
Are you with me? The cross default is not hard to understand. It's just, you go into a village, very small village. It's a village. So you offend one of the villages, you offend all of them. Okay? It's kind of like that, isn't it? Cross default is something that we negotiate for derivatives, And it's also something we negotiate with fixed income. You see that in every single bond issue. Cross default, yes or no? And cross default applicable or not? This is the same thing, okay? Cross default applicable or not? Now, if you are a bond investor, you're buying a bond, or there are two bonds in front of you, and everything looks the same, everything. But one bond says cross default applicable, the other says cross default not applicable. Which one do you think is safer? Who says not applicable? So don't be embarrassed. Why do you think it's not applicable? You are the foreign investor. Yeah, you are an investor, and you are looking at a bond. There are two bonds issued by the same company, same tenor. Okay. Okay. Don't never be afraid to give the wrong answer. Okay. Cross default is always one of the most heavily negotiated aspects in fixed income world and in derivatives, because banks love it, customers hate it. So you want to negotiate with JP Morgan? Well, let's see how much bargaining power you have. Okay. So that's kind of how it works. I think that's pretty much it, really. So you are now all experts in ISDA. I know maybe you don't believe it. So this is all just the legal jargon. I have explained everything. Specified entity is, as I mentioned, specified transactions really are talking about what kind of transactions? Well, they're all here. Look, interest rate swap, basis swap, forwards, commodity swaps, index swaps, index swap. Do you know all these? If you do, you're doing very well. So many. Huh? Specified indebtedness is similar to transaction, but now we are not talking transaction. We're talking like loans, specific loans or bonds. So here's the company level, then the transaction level. But maybe you're not worried about transaction, you're worried about some loans or some bonds. No, this one is, you are referring to, so you are right here. So you are JP Morgan dealing with GE Capital, and you are worried about a particular bond issued by GE Power and Water. So if they ever default on that bond, then you have the right to cancel this relationship. Bond, okay? It's just the bond equivalent of, it's not a transaction, it's a bond, that's all, okay? So these are all termination events. Don't worry about all this stuff. Now, this is talking about cross default. So I already explained to you what it is, and it is usually triggered when a non-defaulting party knows about someone defaulting. So typically this is because it's reported in the news media.
If you default in secret, which I don't think is possible, okay, then they might not know. Credit event upon merger. This is when company A takes over company B. So originally, JP Morgan signs an ISDA with GE, which is an industrial conglomerate. And then let's say GE gets taken over by who? What's a good example? GE gets taken over by, sorry? BMW, okay, BMW, if you say so. Now, so JP Morgan understood this to be an industrial company. Suddenly they're taken over by somebody else, which is in quite a different business. So JP Morgan says, look, I don't really know you anymore. I signed the contract with you and I knew you as GE. You are an industrial powerhouse. Now you become a motor company. So I'm not comfortable dealing with you anymore. That is what's called and then maybe they think that your credit quality has deteriorated. So it's called a credit event upon merger. Okay. Now there are a lot of other details here, but I ask you not to worry about it. Just focus on the things I have told you today, which is, the things that will keep a banker awake at night. Number one, about netting. Number two, how you use a CSA. Number three, when there's trouble elsewhere in a company, which normally you would not be able to control. And the way you would deal with that is by populating all these clauses, like specified entity, specified transaction, or specified indebtedness, and so on. And then the other thing is the concept of cross default. So these are mainly the things I really want to share with you today. Okay, so if you are okay with that so far, you won't have any problems with the quiz. Okay. I will not ask you anything that I have not talked about. And this whole thing is on record anyway, and I will produce a video and share with you. Section 2, not really important. Tax representation. It just tells you are obliged to tell the other party, what kind of tax status you have. You have to state that very clearly in case there are cross-border tax problems. Agreement to deliver documents. Now, this is an interesting one. This is section 3 in the schedule. So you actually can see that this is section 2. Agreement to deliver documents. Now, what is agreement to deliver documents? It is exactly that. So I am, who am I? JP Morgan, right? You are GE, and we agree that, let's say, every year, when your accounts
all consolidated and audited on December 31st. So we promise each other that we will exchange our financials, let's say by the 15th of January. It's a promise. And if you break that promise, it will be same as a default. Now you might wonder, well, why so? What is the big deal? I'm a little bit late. It's a little bit late. No. First of all, you're talking big corporations. There's no excuse to be late. In the past, what we have seen is that when a corporation is expected to publish documents and they're late, it's not like late outside the company. Late with your company reports. That's usually something seriously wrong in the company. So if I want my reports by January 15th and you can't deliver, okay, I'm out. See you later. Okay. That is the idea behind it. You understand? Yeah. That's why you might wonder why do you have to say okay. Deliver it on time, yeah. Otherwise, I will consider you have defaulted. 4 and 5, don't worry too much about these. If you are curious, later you come and ask me, I'll be happy to tell you. It's just a process agent is someone who will represent you. Don't worry about these other ones. Okay, so here is where you have netting. Part 4. Part 4. Netting of payments. You cannot imagine just 3 lines with not more than 25 words can make a difference of billions of dollars. Okay, there's something magical about that. So multiple transaction payment netting will not apply to the system is not applicable. Right? It's just a template. Okay. Think of the significance of that. A little paragraph like this can make the difference. I wouldn't say a matter of life and death, but certainly a matter of, hundreds of millions of dollars. I think you guys want to go. It's 8 o'clock. You're listening to me on a Saturday evening on ISTA documentation. CSA, I already explained to you. So you can read that. And I explain what is a one-way CSA as well. And how to be extremely conservative. Okay. Netting, we have talked about this, and I'm glad we did last time. This is an interesting diagram that should put things, and after this, I'll let you go. Okay. Students always find this diagram fascinating. Now, here is, you put it like this. The difference between having netting and not having netting. So when there's no netting, and you have 2 contracts with a counterparty, and when you are winning here, you are worried because your counterparty is losing, and when you are winning, so now you are worried here. So you're worried all the time, except here. But if you have netting, if you do have netting, everything will net off and you never worry, and every night you will sleep well. Isn't that cool? You understand?
if you don't understand, go home and have a look at it, and then if you still don't understand, come back and I'll explain to you. Okay. But now, oh, it's exactly 1 hour and 30. No, I want to say thank you for coming, and if you have not signed your attendance, I'll give you another chance. Otherwise, I wish you a very nice evening, and thank you for listening to me.